how do you connect your Swift iOS app to an ESP32? Well, in this video, I actually show the full connection process so that you can start communicating between the two. But in this video, I'm just going to do a shorter, more concise description of how you set up the ESP32 to communicate with an iPhone. If you've already got your iPhone communicating with BLE devices, this is the video for you. If you need to see the full connection set up, then you need to go and check out that video. But let's jump into this bad boy. So I've created this little animation that's going to help us walk through the code and understand what's happening on the device when this just horribly messy, chaotic code is being executed. So let's hop into this guy. First off, code, animation, play. So first thing you're going to want to do is initialize your device. So that's going to happen in your initialize in your setup function. So every Arduino hardware device, anything in this kind of ecosystem, you're essentially going to have three main places where you're writing code. One is outside of either of these functions, I'll go into in a second, is essentially outside where you're defining variables and classes and functions that you're going to use in your actual code. Then you have your setup function. That code is essentially run once when your device activates, gets turned on, gets reset, whatever. And then you have your loop function that essentially just keeps on happening forever. It's an infinite loop, and it'll execute, and once it finishes, it goes back up to the top, and you can interfere with that with delays and with conditionals and all that kind of stuff. Now for BLE, you actually don't need your loop to happen at all. You don't really need any code in your loop. And the reason why is because you are initializing, you're using this BLE device init, and you're essentially saying, all right, on this little device, there's a Bluetooth chip on here somewhere, and you're initializing that Bluetooth chip. This Bluetooth chip is going to be sending signals back into your code, and when things happen in your hardware or whatever, or to that Bluetooth server, these callbacks are going to get called. So you set everything up, and then you have functions that are going to get activated when certain events take place. But we'll look more at that later. Essentially, all you got to do is initialize your device in your setup. This up here is obviously your hardware setup. I'm assuming if you're using an ESP32, you're actually integrating with some kind of hardware. In this case, I'm just connecting to a GPIO pin that allows me to turn a light bulb on and off. That can be more complex. You want to initialize your device, and then you want to initialize or create your server. So let's look at what that looks like. Essentially, your BLE device is going to host a server that your mobile app is going to connect to and send information through. That server has all of the information and all the communication mechanisms for communicating with your Swift app. So within that server, you're going to put two things. You're going to put your server callbacks. Now, server callbacks, I don't have an example of that here. I'm going to actually throw one in here for you, though. All right, I've made a couple of adjustments, and now we can actually look at how server callbacks work. My apologies for being so unprepared. It's unacceptable, but we move on. So, BLE server, essentially we are declaring a global server. So we're essentially just setting up the server, but we're setting up a variable that is going to point to the server, but we aren't actually setting the server, right? That's being set up globally. And then we're also tracking globally the state of the device, whether it's connected or not. So then in our setup, we initialize, and we're going to get that global server pointer, and we're essentially going to, well, actually, I don't think it's a pointer. Let me see. Oh, it is a pointer. It's a BLE server pointer. But we're going to grab that, and we're going to use that device, that Bluetooth device, and we're going to create a server. So that's creating this guy. Then we're going to look at the callbacks for that device, and we're going to set those callbacks to be server callbacks. Now I'll run through the setup, and then we'll look at what all these things actually are. But essentially, a server callback is defined up here in our definitions, and it's a class that conforms to or inherits from BLE server callbacks. And then in here we define what it's actually going to do. So in the case of when the server connects to something, it's going to do this. It's going to set its global device connected status tracker to true, because now we're connected to something, and it's going to send status connected. And that send status function is defined up here. That's essentially we're sending status to the mobile app, but we'll get into that, how that actually works later. Then on disconnect, we're going to make sure that we're marking it as false, and we're going to send status that it's disconnected. Although theoretically that should never actually end up there. Now, this is important, and whether this is optimal for production is questionable, but you need to restart advertising on iOS so you need to restart advertising so iOS can reconnect. So basically we'll get into that. We'll get into that in a second. But yeah, so you'll set up those server callbacks. You're going to take your server callback that you defined, and you're gonna just put that in the server. And then you think about it's like this little cloud that's up above your Arduino, and your phone is communicating with that, and you're adding the things that are going to be inside of that server. So server callbacks are one of them. Services is the other one. Now, service architecture, I've gone into that in another video, and what the kind of the structure of these services look like, but essentially you have a service, and that contains a category of functionality, right? So if you have this and you've got like a thermostat, this is like controlling a thermostat. One service might be the battery life or the battery service, so you can check out like how much time there is or how much battery is left. And there might be a temperature service, right? And that temperature service might have a set temperature and read temperature, right? So it's categories of functionality are stored in a service. Now, a service is going to have a couple of things. It's going to have characteristics, and each characteristic is basically one data point of that category of functionality. So if a service, so you have a temperature service, in there you might have your read temperature characteristic and your set temperature characteristic, right? Now, you're essentially going to take those characteristics that you define, and you're going to put them in your service, and you're going to put your service into your server. So let's look at what that code actually looks like. Over here, we're essentially just defining a service, and we're taking our server, and we're calling this create service command, and we're passing our service UUID into there. Now, services and characteristics are tracked by unique identifiers. So the service exists on here, and the unique identifier basically connects you to that service. So your mobile app is going to say, hey, I need the temperature service with this ID. It's going to send that ID in its search, and that's to that server, and that's what's going to connect you with the service. So that ID needs to match on both sides. And I'm essentially just defining our IDs up here. You have service UUID, command character, and status char UID. So services characteristics also are defined or found by their unique identifiers. Then continuing on, you've got that service set up. Now command characteristics, BLE characteristic. You're creating a command characteristic, and you're sticking that into your service, and you're defining a couple of qualities. First off, it has, or properties, it's got, the unique identifier to identify the characteristic, and then you have these actual characteristics. So in this case, property right. And then we are assigning, or we are setting callbacks. So that's essentially the next step, but we'll do this part and this part after. So then we also have the status characteristic. We're taking the service, we're creating a characteristic, we're giving it that unique ID so that it can be found and identified, and then we're giving it the notify characteristic. Now there are various characteristics, but essentially a write characteristic is going to be receiving information from your mobile device, and your notify characteristic is going to be sending information to your mobile device to your iOS app from your ESP32. So in the case of write characteristics, you're going to need to define how is this device going to handle data coming from the app, and then in terms of notify characteristics, you're going to have to define, how is the app going to respond to data coming from the ESP32. Now, you've defined your characteristics. The next step is going to be to, well, here we're doing add descriptor BLE 2902. So this is just something you're always going to have to do whenever you are trying to notify or have an iOS device subscribe or get notified by some characteristic on your BLE device. You need to add this descriptor to your characteristic called BLE 2902. The next thing we're going to do is, well, I guess this kind of skip that part, but we need to insert these callbacks. So as I was saying before, you need to define how your device is going to handle writes. This, we're setting it up so we can send information. But if we come up here, I just remembered I can draw on things. If we come up here to our command characteristics, bam, right here, or our command callbacks, this is essentially where we're defining, hey, for this device that's going to be receiving, or this characteristic that's going to be receiving data from your iOS app. So you have your iOS app up here, and it's going to be sending data into here. This is going to define how it's going to handle that data. Now that data is going to be handled in this on-write function. Now there are also other functions that you can override, but this is the main one we're looking at right now. Basically, you're going to want to decode the command. So however you format your data beforehand, it's going to come in somehow. You're gonna decode it, and then you're going to actually do things with it. So in this case, we're decoding, and then we're saying like, okay, if this is the command, then let's do this. If this is the command, then let's do this. And in here, we're saying like, if the command is LED1 in my app, that means turn the LED on. Then we're going to go to that LED pin, and we're going to turn the light on. And then we're going to do this send status function. So how does this part work? Essentially, you can think about it like this. Right here, we're defining the status characteristic. That's the functionality of the BLE device to be able to tell the iOS device, hey, we have some information that we want to give you. And so we're going to tell you what our status is. In this case, since it's for the light bulb service, we'll be telling the app the status of the light bulb. Now we define this BLE characteristic. This is our status characteristic. Down here, we're going to grab that global status characteristic that we defined earlier. We're going to assign it to the service. We're going to add that little descriptor that allows it to write to iOS. And we can think about it like in this characteristic, we have, let's say, two things. You can have more, but we have some piece of data. Let's call that data. And we have some kind of functionality. Let's call it, some kind of functionality. And one of those functions is to notify. Up in this function send status, which we can just manually call anywhere in our code, we're going to first ensure that this characteristic down here actually exists. And then we're going to go into this characteristic, and we're going to add some kind of value to it, and then we're going to have that characteristic call its notify function, which is then going to send that data up to that iOS app. So that's essentially how we're setting up this whole communication chain. Now, the final step that we'll take is we are going to start advertising. So up here you see BLE get advertising start. well, first off, you want to start your service, and then you want to get your device, and you want to start advertising your device, and then you want to start advertising your actual service, and then you want to start advertising. Sorry, you want to get your advertising, you want to get the advertising capability, store it, assign your service so that it can be advertised, and then finally we'll start advertising. And essentially what that looks like over here is what you see over here, where it starts advertising, and then at that point you have the actual connection process, which I've also gone through in other videos. So I hope that was useful. I hope that gives you an idea of how to set up your your ESP32 device. If you have any questions, leave them in the comments below. Like the video, subscribe if you want to see more of this kind of stuff. Go check out those other videos, and I will see you next time.